Oh, it is a happy Friday. Glad to be
Right?
here this afternoon.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Welcome everyone to On the Rocks, the show where we talk about accounting and accounting adjacent stuff, mostly as it relates to e-commerce, but not only. I'm Chris Gino. He is Jay Kimmelman, and we are the hosts of this show. Last week we talked about third-party logistics. We touched on what to think about when considering a 3PL, as well as some of the pros, which there are a whole bunch of, as well as some of the cons which do exist too. This week, with it being the start of another month, and with the year starting to wind down, we're going to touch on budgeting and forecasting. We'll highlight some of the budgeting basics. We'll introduce some key steps to creating a budget. We'll define how forecasting and budgeting are a little bit different, and we'll touch on techniques that you can use in forecasting. But first, what has happened since last week? And the answer to that is all these slow news weeks. They just put everything on pause, and then we're like, slam! All of the news this week. It seems like I feel like everywhere I turned, I was like, oh man, that's a lot of news. The biggest one, Jay. I am sad to report that I think we have a final resolution to our tax update segment of this. The
Yes.
You want to talk to us about what the Senate did this week?
Yeah, for sure. And this popped up Monday that the Senate was going to take a vote on the tax bill that the House passed last January. And everybody's like, it's July. You're going to look at this now? And considering it impacted the 23 returns. So basically, it was going nowhere. The Senate Republicans said, yeah, this isn't going to work. And the Democrats use it for a political stunt because they want to
Yeah.
highlight the child tax credit and things like that. So yes, we talked about it. We had all this anticipation for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and
Yeah.
here nothing. So yeah,
Yeah.
but
And that's the end result. Nothing.
but
But
right,
yeah, oh,
yeah, a whole lot
but
of nothing. But we did start seeing some pictures coming out about what our candidates are looking at for tax.
yeah.
So
So we do
you
have
know,
tax updates.
yeah, so we
Just
do.
not what we were expecting.
Yeah. So first thing, let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room, which is taxing Social Security benefits.
Ooh. Do,
So,
do, do.
uh, former president, current candidate Trump said he wants to remove the taxation of Social Security benefits. Well,
Hmm.
you know, pandering to these senior citizens so that they get the vote. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But I mean, if people are working and collecting Social Security, they're going to pay tax. And if they don't, and I don't remember what the limit is off the top of my head, but if they're not
Sure.
working, there's no earned income, their Social Security is not taxed. So it's just talk. Now the other
There you
side,
go.
there was a conversation with the Harris campaign. And,
Yeah.
there are a couple factors where they see it impacting the taxpayers. We've talked about and heard all about the Biden administration wanting to get that top 1% of the earners and get them back up to the 39.6% tax bracket. I think
Yep.
that's inevitable. That's going to happen if Kamala does get elected. Uh,
Yeah.
but she's maintaining that $400,000 level will not be impacted. Well, the tax, what's the name of that organization? The Tax Foundation came out
Oh,
and
okay.
said that number, that $400,000 number, was thrown out in 2020. Today, that number really needs to be $480,000
Oh,
with
wow.
inflation. So they need
Yeah.
to be looking at that. So along the other lines there, the Harris campaign, and some of this is from 4 years ago when she originally ran for president.
Hmm.
She wanted to increase or lower the threshold on gift tax, so have a higher gift
Hmm.
tax. And
Yeah.
they're also looking at moving the corporate rate back to 35%. So those are some of the bigger factors, and Biden started throwing that out. He was talking 28%. So, another
Yeah.
7% adds up on that. So
Yeah.
we shall see where it goes. I'm really looking
Right.
forward to seeing if tax policy gets debated here in the next few months and give us something
uh,
to talk about at least on that front.
right, for sure. Yeah, I do think it will be interesting to understand what the different like forks are, or the sticking points. I think we've kind of touched on them. Like they're going to be in these areas, and so with that considered, are there are there any like planning steps that people can make now, or is it really just like wait till we get more info and then there you go?
I mean, they're neck and neck in polls, so we don't know
Right.
which way
Yeah.
it's going to go. So, you can look at it, but you're not going to really make a plan yet until we know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, just, going into it
Call
with your eyes
your
open.
call your friends in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or Michigan, and tell them which side you think they should prefer. Right,
Yeah,
like
there
that's
you go.
that's
Yeah,
about the best you can do. Yeah,
yeah.
that feels right. That feels right. They're like I mentioned, they were hanging on to all the news. So in other news this week, the MPAG, which I believe was a little task force that was put out from the AICPA to investigate why there weren't as many CPAs anymore. They published on Wednesday their accounting talent strategy report. And I'm not going to go. I listed them in our agenda here, Jay, but I don't think it's worth going through all of these now. I do think that might make a good conversation point for the future.
Yeah.
But the thing that I noticed from this list of things was a lot of the points here just don't have. They're like very very high level. They don't have a lot of substance, and they're also they're like much more focused on CPA dumb, like
Right.
actually getting your licensure, than accounting in general, which I actually think is kind of disappointing, because it's not just that there are less CPAs in the field. There are just less qualified accountants, and so I
For
think
sure.
it's actually they kind of missed the framework here, because sure, I mean it was put on by the AICPA, so of course they don't want to like have more CPAs. That just makes sense. But at the same time, I think we also need more accountants who aren't CPAs.
But
Um,
do you think, and I have not looked at this study, and if we're going to have a deeper
yeah,
conversation, I would love to read all that documentation. But do you
sure.
think young professionals are coming out of college and they're hearing that AI is taking accounting jobs and they just don't want to go there?
I kind of think that's a possibility for sure. But you know what? That didn't come on this list. I'll read through
There
the
you go.
the 6 points here just quickly, right? So
Right.
the first three were all around schooling. It was make
Yeah.
academics more engaging, address the time and cost of education, and grow support for the actual CPA exam candidates. And so those things are all related. They're not three
Yeah.
separate points. They're one. The second one was to expand access to underrepresented groups, which is like a basic fundamental of what everybody should be doing. Like I don't know that this is like a giant light bulb here. They also had a point of enhance the employee experience,
Mm-hmm.
which probably could have just been rephrased to say like, pay people more, give people better benefits, maybe work people a little bit less.
Yeah.
But but just it's very broad, enhance the employee experience. And then finally it was tell a more compelling story. And I don't know, and we maybe have talked about this a little bit before, like if you think about your typical accountant, like compelling stories just really aren't, they don't go hand in hand. It's not really how it works. Now of
Right.
course what that means is that Jay, people like you and me who are out here talking uh, to e-commerce business owners on an electronic platform here, like maybe our story is a little more compelling, and maybe that's what we need is more people like us who are interested in being on the front side of technology, in embracing and in using AI to enhance the work that we do, not replace the work that we do. And then telling a story about
For
how that
sure.
works, right? Like that can
Yep.
be more compelling. But if you're going to do that from the profession as a whole, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly the way you do that. outside of just telling the stories of
Very
accountants,
true.
right? We have a lot
Yep.
of compelling people in the industry, even if there is a very lame stereotype out there. So, like I said, those 6 points, not a, they're very very high level, and I do think like it's worth discussing them a little bit more in detail and at some time in the future for sure.
For
Um,
sure.
in CPA specific news, also, um, there is a program out there. Speaking to this, right? There is a program out there that's aimed at reducing the burden of the final 30 hours of education, and they added 100 new people to the program, which was great to see. So they've added a bunch of extra candidates to make people available to be CPAs, which again is not the whole point of the profession, right? Where there are people who don't need to be CPAs who can also be very good accountants and bookkeepers. Um, but it is good to see that they're like starting to come off the 150 so tightly, and and just making progress and at least making some change to some areas where there had been a lot of rigidity previously. So I was glad to see that. Um, our friends over at Accounting Today, they they dropped down some really fun news. Their salary survey came out this past week, and there are like a variety of different positive notes out of that. One is that the longer that you spend in an accounting firm, the more money that you make. And that was pretty clear. The first few years can really, really, really significantly impact your earning potential. And so I think the AICPA task group maybe missed the point on this one, unless that's talking about enhancing employee experience. I think reminding and reiterating to people that you have this opportunity to increase your earning potential pretty quickly in the accounting field is a very positive one. There were also a couple things that I thought were interesting. That I don't know whether they're positive or negative, but almost everyone, like 80 to 90% of people in accounting firms, are in their second firm or later. Like so, they're people just aren't sticking around in the same firm for a really long time anymore. And I think we kind of know that. And there are probably a lot of reasons why that's the case, including enhancing the employee experience. So there are lots of folks that either change roles, so they go from maybe an auditor to a client accounting services person, like I did, or they just change firms altogether, which I did that too. So I think that's a very very regular thing. And the amount of people from all levels across the accounting profession like is very high, of people who are in the different positions and have been somewhere else before. So I thought that was super interesting. And then of course, like like to look and see how you're compensated. So
Yeah.
so take a look if you're interested in it. Partners at smaller firms. There's a lot of earning potential. Partners at bigger firms, there's a whole lot of earning potential. The top 5%, I think, of gigantic firm partners was $1 million or something like that a year. So that's pretty compelling case. That's a compelling story, but it's also not easy to get there. In fact, they talked to people about how long it takes to get to be a partner in the firms that you're in. Smaller firms, as you will not be surprised, are much faster, and larger firms are much longer, and 10 years or more. So lots of information in that salary survey. So if you're interested in it, go take a look at it, and you know, and and use it to like gauge where you are, and don't hesitate if you're not feeling like you're in the right place to make a change. Everybody does it. That's what the survey says. So don't
So true.
don't be surprised to do it yourself. All right, and not to be outdone, just accounting news was everywhere. Wallet Hub actually ranked states based on their tax burdens, so this isn't quite the same kind of accounting news. But you won't be surprised that New York and Hawaii, they took the two top spots as far as tax burdens go. But the state that a lot of people would have guessed, which is California, they were only fifth. So and California doing a little better than I thought. They listed off the whole top 20 in the article that I read around this. And Jay, you will be pleased to know, and I know I certainly was, that Florida and Texas didn't make it to the top 20. So tax burdens in these states a little bit lower than some others in these United States of America. So
Well, now
I thought that was an interesting point.
let's try to find next week a list of the listing of property insurance for states, because Florida should be number
Ooh,
one. It's six times the
ooh,
national average for
yeah, that is
property
a
insurance in Florida. And I think we've had
that
that
is
conversation on here before,
yeah.
because 77 of all homeowners insurance claims end up in litigation. Thus,
Oh my word.
it's so expensive.
Yeah,
So,
that's a lot.
yeah,
Yuck.
yeah,
Yuck.
it's horrible.
Um, we don't have that problem here in DFW, I don't think. Not too many
Yeah,
hurricanes. Um, but I guess that's TBD. We'll see if we can find a list. Maybe
yeah.
just general living burden, cost of
I
living
will look
burden,
for
or something
that.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, which I do think would be interesting. Um, in in acquisition news, so we talked previously about PE coming into accounting in a whole bunch of different spots. Well, this time it's not PE. This time two accounting firms have squished together, CBiz and Markham, 2.3 billion to take one into the other. That is a gigantic transaction, and it makes for a gigantic accounting firm. So
where
I
were
think
they
I saw
ranked
that.
before this merger
I
individually?
didn't I didn't read that in the article that I read. I probably should have written that down. And I know that out of this merger, they're very large. In the
Yeah,
Tampa area, actually, the article I read was out of a Florida publication. In the Tampa area, I think it makes them top five, and so that's pretty sizable.
yeah,
Um, so that is
that
big
should be
accounting
interesting.
news.
Yeah,
They're not to be outdone. Our friends at the PCAOB. They're still banging out audit deficiencies. I saw an article this week around that audit deficiencies are kind of their highest levels in a long time. Particularly, this article was focused on broker dealers, which is a specific type of entity. Um, Now, that has nothing to do with e-commerce really, but it is just an interesting fact because those types of entities have certain kinds of complexity around them. Broker dealers have a lot of unusual accounting stuff that they have to deal with. Hopefully, e-commerce space entities don't have too many audit-related deficiencies, but it's just a continuing sign from the PCAOB that they're whipping around compliance over there. And then Barry, I know we talked about Barry. Oh my god, I don't even remember his last. Melancon. What is his name?
mm-hmm.
What's Barry's name? Barry. Yeah, Barry.
Melanson, I think.
Melanson. So he gave an interview this week, I think, talking about the Supreme Court, and and like we mentioned on this podcast, as soon as those rulings came out, you will not be surprised that the Supreme Court ruling there may make their tax accountants may make their job a little bit more difficult. These rulings might suck. Um, and to reiterate what that means, maybe some of the old IRS rules, things that have already been approved, like those may be in kind of like grandfathered in basically of the. I mean, this is how we handle this now. But anytime that a new taxing provision gets added, the IRS isn't going to be able to give you an opinion on it. They're not going to be able to give you at least a binding opinion on it, because those opinions need to be adjudicated, and a judge needs to make a decision on it now. And so that might make some tax compliance a little bit more challenging. That also, from my perspective, and this is I mentioned this back before, but that also might mean that there is an opportunity for additional manipulation of the tax code, particularly some of the newer rulings in your favor. So if you can't tell a good story about what you're doing, maybe it's time to figure out how, because you might have some flexibility if you can. But all that means is that overall, tax compliance may get that much more complicated, as if it weren't complicated enough already. So Barry's already aware of that, and you should be too. So just know that in the coming years, there may be additional complexity that comes out of new IRS rulings and particularly IRS guidance. So we will see how all of that shakes out over time, I think, and maybe it's not as big a deal as we think it is, but we'll find out.
Well, I would think with the ambiguity, until there is a court case, it's going to push audits up. and you're just going to start auditing because there's no position. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's until somebody pushes back. The IRS can audit it, find
Yeah.
in favor of themselves, and charge you more tax. So I would anticipate that going forward.
Yep. We will
So like you said, come up with a narrative and build on it if you're
make it a
going
good
to
one.
do something along those lines for sure.
Yep, absolutely. So if you're doing anything that could potentially be in the gray, make sure you have a good advisor. And in this case, maybe that advisor doesn't need to be crooked, but it could just be like a regular advisor, like just somebody who can tell a good story. Like it doesn't you don't have to be cheating. That's just the rules now. They just make it more complicated. That's all. That's all. So, at least on the accounting side of the world, that was a lot of news. I also saw a couple of pieces of interesting information on the e-commerce side of the world, and the first one actually ties right into our conversation point from last week. Naturally, Google or whoever must have been listening to me because as I was searching e-commerce news, one of the sites that I regularly go to, they had an article from ShipExcel that talked about the 3 things to look for in your shipping solutions, which I thought was so relevant that I would have loved to have had it 1 week prior because we could have incorporated it into our conversation. But shockingly, the 3 things that they had were actually things we talked about. So I was glad to see that. They talked about integrations as an important thing to look for, which we talked about specifically. They talked about customizability, which we didn't use that word, but we did talk about how you can tailor and package things to be useful for you, which is customizability. So we talked about that as well. And there was an interesting thing that their third point was insights, which was a point that we didn't really touch on that much, but is an interesting one because these 3PLs they do this all the time. They do this not just with you, but with other customers and clients as well. And so they can provide you additional information and insight related to how your product is shipping and things that you need to be aware of. And so I thought that was a really good add-on to our topic from last week from ShipExcel. So thanks, ShipExcel, for putting that article in my feed. I hope it didn't cost you that much money in ad revenue or ad costs, but I bet it did. Um, so thanks for listening to the show, ShipExcel. Good job by you. Another couple e-commerce points of note that came up. Walmart and Morning Consult. They did Morning Consult is a name I recognize from polling. And Morning Consult and Walmart, they came together to put together a report that was a poll of consumers. And 55% of Gen Z people in this poll, or in this survey, they bought items online while browsing social media. And it just speaks to how significant e-commerce will be going forward because the kids are already using it. They're using it now, even when they don't even have high-paying jobs. So imagine what will happen when they do. So this is just the start. It will continue to go from there. There were a lot of different points that Walmart was surveying on in this article, and so there were some other insights that came out of it. But this one was the most interesting one to me.
The power of
And then
retargeting for sure. Popping those
absolutely,
ads in your reels, your stories, etc. It's there in front of your face all day long.
yep. And if that's where people are getting their news, which was another thing that this surveyed, is where do you get your news
Mm-hmm.
from? And also, like, what were your shopping trends? Like, where did you go to first? Did you go to the website? Did you go to your social media page? Where did you go to first when you heard about different products? And so the power of that retargeting, where you're saying, hey, I saw that you paused
Yeah.
on my ad, you clicked through it once. Like, don't forget that we're here. You still like us, I'm sure. It can be really, really powerful. Absolutely. Finally, or maybe finally, I guess we'll see. The next thing is that the CEO of Prompt. I'm sorry, whatever company you are. The company is a retailing solution, like a payment solution. So I think it's Prompt. And I'm sorry that I've messed it up. But they said that global retail lost $429 billion to payments fraud, which is a really big amount. And they also highlighted that going forward and in the future, their expectation is that instead of paying with credit cards and that kind of thing, people will utilize digital wallets and and other enhancements to payment priorities are going to be really important. And so I thought it was an important thing to bring up of, hey, this person who's in the like forefront of this field is highlighting the way that you do things right now isn't going to be the way that it always is. And so being conscious of that, which we've talked about before on the show, being conscious of how your security is managed and uh, how your payment processing is done, how that information is maintained, is really really important. And it's not going to stop being. It's just going to get that much more important. And it may even get to the point where you can only do business through these digital wallets because of these types of problems where people are stealing information uh, and there needs to be some additional verification. So be aware of that.
So what has it been, about 5 years, 7 years now that we start getting our chip and pin cards?
Has it
Europe has
been
had the chip and
only
pin
that long?
cards for years, and
Yeah.
you know, I recall, being that I was consulting with my clients regarding it. I'd go into a national vendor or a chain store, and they're not doing that. I'm like, why are you not doing it? And they're like, the cost to implement is less than the amount of fraud that they're dealing with.
Oh wow.
So in some cases, they don't care about that $430 billion.
Wow.
And then, you go into another national chain and it's like, hey, I don't want to pull my cards out. I want to use Apple Pay. Yeah, Apple Pay is not secure enough for us. So we're not going
Hmm.
to implement it. It's
Yeah.
tokenized, for Pete's sake. It's the safest model out there. So come on now. They had just updated all of their terminals, put in all new card swipers and all that stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you were just too cheap, or you missed the mark, and you had
Right.
an older contract or something. You just didn't get it. Don't make up stories that it's not secure. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Some people know better, but not everybody, Jay. Not everybody. Somebody believed that story.
yeah, for
Um,
sure. Oh, the guy that told me
exactly.
definitely believed it.
Too funny. Okay, so that was a lot of news, and some of it can be really impactful. I think the 6 point thing out of the AICPA, as well as that Accounting Today survey, those are really useful pieces of information, and I'd encourage everyone that's listening to go take a look at those two things. I'm sure they will come up again. Um, for sure. Jay, did I miss any news? What else
Uh,
happened this week? The Olympics are
uh,
ongoing. We'll talk more about that
yeah, I was going
at
to
the
let
end of the
that go
show
for
today.
now. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot of news
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Well, I think we have
All
a
right.
lot to look forward to next week, though.
Yeah, another exciting news week as the kids go back to school. Um, we'll have lots and lots to talk about as well. I'm sure. I'm sure. All right, Jay. Today I went back to the High Rock Cup. So
Okay.
shout out High Rock. And I am drinking Kitchen Lights, a West Coast style IPA out of False Idol Brewing. And then when I finish that, we're going Black is Beautiful, volume number 2, um, which is brewed in support of the National Black Brewers Association. So pretty
Nice.
excited. Proceeds go to develop and grow the Black Brewers foundations nationwide. So they're reaching out to underrepresented groups. They know what's going on.
There you
It's
go.
not just the AICPA; it's brewers as well. So good job by them. Good job by them.
There you go.
Jay? How about yourself? What are you
I
drinking
am
today?
drinking water today. I mean, we here in Florida are
Stay
under,
hydrated.
yes, we are under an emergency watch because we have pending tropical weather coming. So just
Yeah,
making sure everything is
heard about
taken care
this.
of around the house tonight and tomorrow. So, just being
Who is it that's on the
responsible.
way? Debbie.
Yeah. We'll wait till
Debbie,
Sunday and have
Debbie
a
comes in.
hurricane party. No,
All right, there you go.
all
That'll be
responsibility goes out the
a
window then.
that'll be a thing to talk about again at the end of the show.
Yep.
So today, we'll talk about what to do in situations like this. Their budgeting and forecasting are critical, right? It's the middle of the year. You want to know how you're doing. You also want to know where you're heading, and that's a very very reasonable thing to want. The best ways to do that, of course, are budgeting and forecasting. So let's talk about them. First, we're going to talk about what's budgeting. Uh, well, Jay, I think when I think of budgeting, I think of it as planning. And so when I've been watching the Olympics, and especially as we were talking about this topic all week, I was thinking about how much budgeting had to go into what was going on because there are so many venues that are being utilized. There are so many athletes that need to be coordinated. There's so much activity that's happening that if you don't have a good framework around what you're doing, like it could just all fall flat on its face. But as
For
far as I've been
sure.
able to tell, the Olympics have gone pretty smoothly. And that's an indicator to me that number one, it's being project managed very well, but also that somebody came up with an effective budget. And so, what does a budget entail? A budget is an expectation of your revenues and costs for an upcoming period. Typically, you budget for the next year. You budget for the year that's upcoming. You budget your revenue projections. You can do that in a variety of different ways, but you project how much revenue you're going to bring in. You also project your cost of sales. So some component of that revenue is going to need to be product mix, so that you understand how much those different products are going to cost, so you can estimate those cost of sales. You also will project operating expenses, marketing costs, and other types of expenses, just miscellaneous expenses in general. You put all that together for periods of going into the future, and you look at it in total. But you can look at it month by month. Typically, a budget is maintained on a monthly basis, and one of the most critical things about a budget is uh, it's it, it's something that you want to look at regularly. So you don't want to just set it and forget it, because that will be doing your budget a disservice. But you want to understand, how did you perform against that budget? And so one of the key factors of a budget is that it's something that you're evaluating your actual performance against. And I think that'll come up later when we talk about forecasting, because forecasts, you don't always do the same thing. It doesn't work quite the same way. It's one of the most important things in the budgeting process is that you need to be realistic. That the reason why that's important is because if you have $200,000 in sales a month, but you budget for $400,000 of sales for the next month, or every single month of the next year, you're going to budget or expect a bunch more profit than you're actually going to end up with. And more importantly, because so many things are driven by overall revenue, so that'd be costs, that'll be like your payroll expenses and all kinds of other supporting costs. So many of those things are driven by that you will probably overspend yourself and get into a situation where you're not managing your business the way that you should. And so some of the things that are important to do when you're preparing a realistic budget is to use historical information. Be realistic about what your goals are. If you have historically continued to grow 10% per year, then maybe it is very reasonable to grow 10% the following year. But if you've been stagnant for years and years in a row, projecting a significant growth is probably not all that realistic. It's also really important that you consider current market trends. And so if prices are rising like they've been, if inflation is going up, then maybe you can kick that in and build that into your revenue estimates. But you also want to be taking that into consideration on the cost side. Um, and then a really important thing with budgeting is to allow for flexibility. Know that your budget's not fixed, that it is something that you can't estimate the future that perfectly, right? It's going to be wrong, and so you need to understand what it means for it to be wrong. Jay, what do you think? What did I miss when we talk about budgeting generally?
So the realistic part of it is the most important thing. And what you want to
Yeah.
do is, when you're developing a budget, is look at your overall goals and objectives for the next year, 3 years, and see what
Right.
you're trying to achieve. And you might be putting in a new marketing plan or something. And by
Yeah.
doing so, you might think you're going to double your business. So if you are going to budget an increase from 200,000 a month to 400,000 a month, well, what are the steps that's going to get you there? And build that as part
Right.
of your assumptions of your budget. Yeah, and
Yes.
maybe you're looking at changing your mix of products, and you're going to start selling products with a higher margin or a lower margin. You want to make
Right.
sure you're taking that into account. So your sales might go up, but your overall margins might drop. So you might end up with the same profit you had. So all of that comes into it, and you want to make sure
Right.
you're capturing that. Um, uh, yeah. So I'm just looking at the notes over here.
Yeah. No. No. I think it's. I think
I
it
think,
another.
yeah, go ahead.
Uh, I was just going to say. I think another important thing to think about when you're creating a realistic budget is that projecting an increase in sales is very reasonable, right? That can happen, but you also have some limitations. So it's important to think about how much inventory you have and how much inventory you can buy and how much you can hold versus how much you can buy in a single order quantity, how much you can get at a period in time. Like there are constraints around your revenue growth that you also need to be thoughtful about, and that's why using current information can be so valuable in building these budgets. Um,
But all of those factors come into play when you're forecasting and knowing how much
mm,
cash you're going to need to have that inventory on hand to sell
that's
that.
right.
So, it all
Right.
comes full circle there. So, what we'll
It
do
does
here
all it
shortly.
it does all come full circle for sure. What
Yeah.
one other thing that I think is important to talk about here is the purpose of budgeting, right? And so the purpose of budgeting is to help you to plan your expenditures, to allow yourself guidance or your team guidance of how much they can spend and where they can spend it, so that you have a good idea of how your business is running and what you and your team should expect overall. And that's why it's so important to follow up on these budgets after time, because you want to be able to understand whether people are expending the amounts that you've allowed, or whether you're overspending, or more importantly, in some cases, that you're underspending. Because if you aren't spending as much as you needed to have, especially in your marketing and advertising, like that may have negative impacts in other areas of your business. Um, and so, again, the purpose of a budget is to give you a framework of how you're going to reach your goals. um, and so, like Jay was talking about, like understanding what you want those goals to be is critical in building out and going through the process of making a budget. And so, if we were to like set a step by step process for creating a budget, um, we can do that. And we want to talk through that. The first one is to understand what that goal is, right? So set a financial goal. Understand where you're trying to get to, understand why you're trying to get there, and what the reasons are behind it. A second thing that you want to do is analyze your past performance. You want to understand the ratios that exist between your cost of sales and your revenue, or your operating expenditures and your revenue, so that you know how those things will trend over time. Um, Once you understand that past performance and some of those relationships, the next thing that you want to do is project out your revenue. You can do that in a wide variety of ways, but ultimately, the thing that's very important is to be realistic. And then secondly, to understand where that revenue is going to be generated from. So that means allocating resources and projecting your expenses. One thing that we didn't really talk about all that much is adjusting your budget, but one thing that you'll find is that if you do this quarterly, so if you review your budget every month, and then each quarter you like go back to touch and spot check and make changes if you need to, or even more tightly, you could do this monthly if you were really cash tight or really wanted to keep a laser focus on where you were as a business. You could do this as much as monthly, and I'm sure you could even do it more frequently than that if you wanted to, but that would be very burdensome. And so make
And
sure that you're monitoring and
I just
adjusting
want
your
to say,
budget
I
as you
think
need to.
an important factor here is you don't have to have just one budget or forecast. You could have your
Right.
annual budget, and then you could adjust it moving forward based on actuals or things that are changing in the environment. So I
Right.
would say, you probably, and like companies that I've worked for, they had to get the budgets approved and the boards have to meet on that, and they never change, but they will
Right.
do forecasting and update that and create different forecasts based on the markets that or the market factors that are interacting with the
Yeah.
business. So
Right.
you could have multiple budgets and you can report against them all as well.
Right. Yeah, which is really important because that is how you monitor the budget. Is you need some kind of reporting, and that's why it's important to find a tool that can allow you to get the information that you need. Obviously, we're big fans of Zero here, and Zero is a great tool for being able to maintain a record of your financial performance. And Jay, can you talk about how you can incorporate budgeting right into Zero? Is that easy to do? Is that a thing
Oh
you can do at
yeah,
all?
it's
So
super
easy.
simple. It's got a
Yeah.
built-in budget manager. You can
Hmm.
export out your historic transactions or historic reports, modify it, and work it in Excel, re-upload that back in, and then report against it, and just build the reports up to have an actual versus budget with a variance. Very, very simple, very easy to use. Love it.
Yeah. So if you're using Zero already and you're not taking advantage of that, you probably should. You can also do similar things in other accounting systems, or you could do it the old-fashioned way, write in Excel or Google Sheets or whatever your preference is there. Um, some other highlights or tips that we wanted to make sure, some pitfalls we wanted to remind you about, right, is again, I want to just reiterate how important it is to regularly review and update. Because if you set a budget and you don't even look at it ever, like it wasn't even worth going through the exercise for. It is critical when developing a budget that you're evaluating performance against that budget. This is the most important thing about budgeting is making sure that you're looking back at it and then making updates if you need to, right? Or if you have team member turn or you have significant changes in the business, sometimes those budgets just don't make sense anymore. And so because of that, you want to make sure that you're evaluating and updating as necessary. It is important in the budgeting process that you involve key team members, the people that are going to be making the purchase related decisions. You want to know that they're getting the support that they need to be able to function in their job effectively. And so that means that you have to ask those questions of them in the budgeting process of what is it that you need? How can we make sure that we're supporting you properly? Now, you can't give everybody everything that they want. It's just not reasonable. You need to be realistic, right? But that's exactly why it's important to talk to the team, is because you want to show them here is a realistic formula or format for what we're trying to expect here, and we want to make sure that we're all aligned and heading in the same direction there. And then last tip for maintaining and evaluating a budget is to stay informed about market changes. And so understand the things in the market that may impact your budget, the performance that you've had, or if Facebook makes an algorithm change and now it's costing a little bit more to touch some people, you need to know that. You need to understand that the impact that may have on you and your business, and things like the salary guides and those types of things, right? If you have a set of people and you need to know that maybe the market is just demanding that you pay those folks more now. So there are all kinds of market factors to be aware of. So staying informed about those things, listening to a show like ours, can be really, really helpful in guiding you through the budget process. Jay, what do you think? Are there other steps or things to evaluate in the budgeting process that you think are worth highlighting today?
Well, I will expand on the regular review.
Mm-hmm.
Most companies put together a financial report every month, and key
Mm-hmm.
employees all get a copy of it. They have meetings, they discuss it. You know,
Right.
when you're looking at evaluating your KPIs, your key performance indicators, you're looking at specific metrics, but also look at your budget versus actual. There are certain things you want to be looking at there. And I would also start looking at budgeting items that might not be financial, like um,
Units.
website visits, um,
Mm.
uh, store visitors, things along those lines.
Yeah,
So you
right.
could budget that and see how that is impacting your actual sales, and take
Well,
that into account. And
yeah,
it all doesn't have to be financial data that we're looking at. So
right. Well, yeah, and there's so many things that we've talked about and the metrics that we've talked about that are so important that matter so much. You talk about site visits. You could consider like budgeting an average order value. We need to
mhm.
hit this much order or these
Right.
many overall orders a month, right? There are so
Yep.
many pieces of data that don't just live in revenue and costs that are really important to monitor and to have an expectation for so that you can know whether or not your business is performing good or not. Like there's no question that not limiting yourself to just financial information is a really important
Exactly.
thing to do.
Exactly.
And so Jay, I've talked a lot about budgeting. Do you want to talk a little bit about forecasting while
Sure.
I head to
While you
Black is
refill
Beautiful
there,
here?
yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So forecasting is very similar to budgeting, but you
Mm.
want to look at it in different ways. You might have a short-term forecast where you're looking at sales, for the next 5 to 10 weeks, maybe, or
Hmm.
you're looking at that forecast over the next 5 years. You know, there are different ways of looking at that because you have different reasons for doing it. And
Right.
then, you're going to build out forecasts that might be static forecasts based on history, or you might
Hmm.
build a rolling forecast that will build over time and will just keep updating itself as time flies. So
Right.
those are different factors you want to be looking at there. So, and just to relate this to something that I had done in the past, I had worked for a healthcare company where we had butts and beds, and they were constantly having updated forecasts. And basically, they did what was called, every company has a weekly flash report, or this company
Yep.
actually called it a weekly P&L, where they would update, on a weekly basis, the number of butts in bed, the payer mix, and then certain key factors as far as it went to expenses like food cost and labor cost, etc. And then, you know, of course, in healthcare, you don't have enough butts in bed, so now we're off target. So now we're forecasting how are we going to get back to that target. So it's like every week there was a new forecast being made, and everything was really short term because we had to get back to make that budget number. And that's where kind of where that was coming from. You got to keep that
Yep.
budget number, make that number, but now you have a forecast and your sales are like 25% higher because you got to make that sales goal. So,
Right.
that's some of the things that we went through during that time. So,
Yeah,
and
I think that's a really good way to describe the difference between budgeting and forecasting is budgeting is the high level longer term evaluation. So you're like it's like you're in the goal effectively, and the forecast are the steps that you need to take along the way to get there.
right,
Where you're doing very similar things, right? You're looking at historical data, you're looking at market trends, you're but here you're going to because it's more short term in nature. You're going to look a lot more at sales and demand. You're gonna understand like, hey, there's a big holiday coming up. We need to make sure we're well prepared for that. We need to do X, Y, and Z to be able to be like on track to make that happen. And then you can also use certain tools. I know I don't. I'm trying to think of exactly how you'd incorporate these together, but like Shopify
mm-hmm,
Analytics or Google Analytics can be used
for
to like
sure.
help with forecasting, and then of course there's like
Yep.
loads of different forecasting tools out there, software and those types of things. And so they with forecasts you're really just doing outward looking planning. You don't do the same like how did we do to the forecast. That's not really the goal. But you do want to make sure that your forecast isn't static either. And so as time passes or as you now have new information, you need to make sure that your updated forecast, that you're rolling it out, that you're making regular updates and revisions, that that you're not just relying on one source either. Like you want to make sure that you have information from a lot of different places, or as many are relevant. And then I do think one thing that you should incorporate both in forecasts and also in budgeting are industry related benchmarks, right? So understand what certain what makes sense to other people who are doing the same thing, right? Because you want to be able to do that same thing, right? You want to make sure that you're being thoughtful of the same types of information. Um, as far as it comes to forecasting, um, there are like other things to think about, right? What what do you think are some of the benefits of forecasting, specifically for e-commerce stores, Jay?
Well, specifically for e-commerce stores, I mean, I think the highlights there are knowing what your sales are going to be or predicting what your sales are
Right,
going to be short term so that you can have proper cash on hand to pay your bills,
right.
which most of the time is getting more inventory to sell so you can meet those further down the line forecasts for your sales.
That's
So,
right.
that it's a constant flow, it's a cycle. And in order to make those higher revenue numbers, you have to
Yeah,
forecast higher so you know what's coming in on the backside. And and that's the biggest thing for e-commerce companies is making sure you have the product to sell and
right.
you're staying ahead of the market on your products so that you're not having products stuck in inventory
Yeah, and we've talked
and
about this before on both of those
forever.
sides, right?
Right,
Is that like
exactly.
inventory management and stockouts are horrible, right? You don't want
Yep,
to stock out of anything, but you also don't want a 6 year supply.
right.
And so having a good, well tailored, well thought through forecast allows you to manage that inventory more effectively. It's just better because you can, it gives you an idea of how much you're going to sell in the next few weeks, few months, and you can use that to inform your decisions. You can make better decisions both from a cash flow management perspective, but also from an inventory management perspective, and then past that too from a like overall team perspective. So other expenditures, like if you know you're going to have a great month, like you can spend a little more on your team, or if you know that you're going to be at a conference or at a convention or something like that for a week, maybe you know that that's going to spike your sales, or maybe you know that that's going to take you away from the business, so you're not going to be able to fulfill quite as much or something like that, right? Being aware of those things helps you to make better decisions. um, and then like the basics, right? That cash flow thing, right? That's enhanced financial planning. Like it helps you to plan better, like what you're doing with your business. That is a benefit, of doing forecasting and doing it properly. um, what else? What other things do you want to talk about as it comes to forecasting, Jay? What do you think?
Well, something I was just thinking of, and it's not just now, but it just popped into my head again. But you know,
Sure.
most e-commerce businesses make sales because they're using advertising tools, whether it's Google, social media, Facebook ads, whatever it happens to be. And
Right.
you can actually do forecasting scenarios. So, what will happen if, let's say, we raise our ad spend by 10%? And
Hmm.
boom, there you go. That 10% will increase your sales by 20%. And you test that, and then you
Right.
can start putting that into your forecast and actually seeing it happen. And,
Right.
by doing that, you're actually measuring the effectiveness of your ROAS
Hmm.
and seeing how that works into that. So,
Right.
all of that comes into play when you're forecasting.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's so important because it gives you so much information.
For sure.
And so as you do that, as you think about forecasting, as you think about what that means to your business, like you do want to like understand what happened, right? You want to evaluate that to your budgets, and then understand and take into account what happened when you're continuing to plan that forecast going forward. Um,
And the
Go ahead,
last
Jay.
thing I want to say there is don't wait too long to do your evaluation, your forecast versus actual, and budget
That's right.
versus actual. You got to do it on regular periods because if you wait too long and things are going in the wrong direction, you don't want to wait and miss out the opportunity to turn that around.
Right.
So make sure you're doing it on a regular basis and not, don't make it a 6 month basis. I mean, it should be a monthly basis when you're doing that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you so much ability. We've talked about this through all kinds of different things, but it gives you so much ability to make a decision and effectively implement your strategy so that you can understand like what is it that I need to change? What are the things that I need to do? So again, budgeting
exactly.
and forecasting, if there's no other takeaway, budgeting and forecasting help you to make better informed strategic decisions. And that is the highlight of today's episode. Some practical tips for folks that are listening. Some things the things to think about as you head off to start budgeting for the first time, or start for forecasting for the first time. Right. The best one, right, is start small. Like don't like you don't need like every single line item on your P&L and by department and by individual. Like start small. Say revenue costs, maybe revenue cost of sales costs, maybe cost of sales ad spend costs, like the critical stuff, right? Know the critical stuff, start small, and then refine your process, make it better over time, right? You don't need to do it. You don't need to go all the way through, right? Like be reasonable. um, the second thing, and you know that Jay and I are going to tell you this every time, but leverage technology. Like where you can, use Xero. Where you can, use your accounting system to help you to make this process easier for yourself, and improve it for you overall. So leverage that technology for both that analysis, but also for the data collection, right? As much as you can. Like you don't have to go out and mine the data yourself. Like just build a report, leverage the technology to build that to produce that information for you regularly anyway. And then the third thing, and this is the whole thing about strategic decision making in the first place, is to stay adaptable, right? Be ready to make changes. Be ready to pivot if you have to, because that's exactly what you might need to do. That's the point of evaluating the budget, is that sometimes there are changes that need to be made. Sometimes those forecasts don't come through, and you have to maybe make an edit or make an update or make a change. So stay adaptable and be ready to pivot as it is necessary. Jay, what other thoughts do you have related to budgeting and forecasting today?
Keep it realistic. And as you're forecasting, be aware that if you come up with unachievable expectations, it will have an effect on your team.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to get them to do the impossible, it's not going to work. And
Hmm.
I've seen that in the past where your sales goal exceeds 100% of capacity, and you can't do
Hmm.
that. So
Not realistic.
yeah, it's not realistic. So make it realistic, make it achievable, and
Yep.
work with your team to achieve more.
That's
And
right.
the other
That
side of that is if you can't make up the revenue, well, you have another way of getting to that profit number.
that's right. It's got
Sometimes
to
you got to
cost.
cut the bottom line. So yeah,
Sometimes you do.
yeah,
Um, and so being adaptable to that, right? That's exactly a thing to think about. Sometimes those decisions can be really difficult, but sometimes those are the ones you have to make, if,
for
if
sure.
that's if you truly want to hit those goals. So again, start small, use technology, be flexible, and be realistic. So 4 points. um, so use those, and you'll get yourself started on the right path to successful budgeting. Um, Jay, what's going on this weekend? What you got going on? You're hurricane party?
Yes. Well, we don't.
Any?
We won't see a hurricane, but we are
No.
under a emergency watch or whatever the state has, the
Mm.
natural disaster emergency, which you have to do that. But let's see. Speaking of
Oh,
forecasting,
oh, there you go. It's a different kind.
so yeah, so This is
Ooh.
the European forecast model, and
All right.
this is set for Sunday at 2 p.m. And you'll notice the
Okay.
center of the storm is off the coast. And
Yeah. All
if I were
right.
to run this, it's going to come up through here and then curve.
I'll see.
So
You're just
basically,
gonna catch a bunch of rain.
yeah, we're going to catch a bunch of rain from this one. Now, take at the same time using the GFS, which is the American model, same time, that low is right here, which is right over
On top of you.
Orlando,
Yeah.
and it's going to cut across here and probably redevelop out here and then ride the coast. So,
Mm.
you know, forecasting is important, and we're paying attention to that because and
Because
normally
there's a
the
lot of
European
decisions that
model,
need to be made.
there are a lot of this exactly. Like this morning, I made sure I had propane because my generator runs on propane, as does my grill. So we're
Mm.
ready there. We got gas in the car. We got water. Because this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this,
Yeah.
as we talked about earlier, this year is going to get worse. And
Yeah.
like we talked about last week, that 9/15 deadline is looking a lot like February. So,
We will see how it goes. Hopefully they'll all stay lighter like this one looks like
yeah,
it might. But obviously I think that's not realistic either.
yeah,
But we
for
will see
sure.
how it goes. Jay
But
Jay
other than that, go ahead. Yeah,
No, I was gonna say you've been watching storms, obviously, right? You've been storm watching. Have you been watching the Olympics this week?
I have been watching the Olympics. I've watched more
Yeah.
Summer Olympics than I normally do. Although
Yeah.
I do like some of the kayak and canoe
Down the
uh,
slaloms or whatever.
the slaloms. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love watching them do that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And the gymnastics, the diving, it's all been really cool watching it.
Yeah. I kind of think it's a bummer that the like core times are right during the workday. But NBC has done a great job of their Olympic coverage. They introduced Gold Zone this year, which is a fun development.
Yeah,
I really liked that. But I actually like even better though. Like they have a multi-sport or like big sport view. That's four sports at the same time all of the time. So
right,
where Gold Zone may be like two sometimes, but eight sometimes. This one is, and they pick like what you're listening to. This
right.
multi-sport one is four, and you can choose of the four which ones you're listening
Yeah,
to, which I've really enjoyed, and so I've let that be on in the background a couple days, especially because the swimming is like at 1:30 my time, the finals and those types of things, and then the Olympic day kind of ends around 4 o'clock our time here
right.
in Texas as well. So it hasn't been too bad as far as that goes. My evening has been taken up with watching rowing. I've really enjoyed. We have a rower here in the house, and I was like, these people are going so fast. I've never even gone that fast at all, and they're just going at this pace for 2,000 straight meters. Like, this is absurd.
Right.
Absurd. These athletes are absurd. A podcast that I was listening to, they were talking about if somebody gave you like $1 million or whatever, and we're like, you can train for a sport for the next Olympics. Which one could you do, right? And the more I watch it, the more I'm like, none of them, just zero. It doesn't matter. I could have 4 years to do it. I could have had 4 years to do it when I was 20 years old, and just zero chance of being able to do any of them. Like, just none at all. And
Yeah,
and so it is always such a joy to watch these athletes at their peak performance to just do things that the normal regular people like you and me, Jay, like couldn't do. 11 feet in the air is Simone Biles for real right now. Like, come on, what are we doing here? That's
yeah.
pretty
That
high.
was that was
That's like
pretty
above a
incredible.
door.
Yeah,
Incredible, just incredible. And I think that's the continued draw of the Olympics. Really, is that the feats that happen, they're incredible. And so I'll keep watching. I know track and field kind of started up today. The decathlon got started, and they did some of that. And then they ran the 10K race just in 2 hours ago or so, I think. So that was a fun watch. It was a really exciting finish. So I'm not going
yeah.
to ruin it for anybody if you're watching on the NBC late coverage or whatever. So go watch that. I'm sure they'll give you some 10K action. And then, of course, I think the swimming is coming to a close too. So we got a couple more swims left, but some exciting finals tonight. The men's 50 freestyle was today too, which is one of the most ridiculous races I've ever seen because everybody's going super fast for a super short period of time. It's like the 100 meters of the pool, but for only 50 meters. So
Yeah.
everybody's just super bunched together, and incredible things can happen. So
Well,
um,
we've been enjoying the fact that we could just go to a sport and say, okay, let's watch that final lap.
yeah, that's what I've done with
The on
rowing.
demand has been great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've done with rowing. I've actually the other night I watched the entire day's repechage while I was like, well, my wife wasn't feeling well, so she went to bed early, and so I just had it on while I was reading and just in the background, and it was kind of a bummer because the races are like 6 minutes to 7 minutes long. They're like pretty short, and then between each one it's like a 2 minute commercial break. So I was watching just as much
Nice.
commercials as it was races, but it got me invested. And so when they
Yeah.
did some of the medal matches yesterday, I was like, "Let's go! The Romanians, they're doing great again. This is great." I really have enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So that's taken a lot of my time for sure, and will again over the weekend, I'm sure. As especially as we get into track and field, I think some of I don't know exactly what the schedule is, but I'm sure it's going to be great. Jay, do we have any accounting related news that we expect to come out of this next week, or e-commerce related news?
Not next week. I mean,
Next
the
week, yeah.
following week we're heading to ZeroCon, so we'll have some
Yeah,
industry
we
news
are.
coming out of there, I am sure.
That
Uh,
really looking forward to that.
for
Jay,
those interested,
are we gonna go live from Nashville?
uh,
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
I think we're flying back
We'll figure it out.
on Friday afternoon.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to
So,
figure out what we're doing
but
there.
yeah, we might. I mean, I'm planning on streaming from there.
Yeah,
But I am doing the session on e-commerce. So if you are at ZeroCon, yeah, come check it
come
out.
listen to Jay.
Looking forward
Love
to
it.
it. Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
good stuff.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Well, Jay, stay safe in the storms.
will do.
Enjoy the Olympics before the power goes out, if it does, and have a great weekend.
You
Any
too.
parting thoughts today? Any great questions about about the NBA and TNT or anything like that this week?
No,
Anything in the
not
news?
this week.
All right. Well,
Nope.
wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, for listening to us talk about budgeting and forecasting. This was on the rocks. I'm Chris. I did it wrong again. Damn it. I'm Chris. He's Jay.
There you
We'll
go.
see you next week. Have a great weekend. Thanks for
Have
watching.
a great weekend, everybody. We're out.